Welcome to this week's episode of the Liberty Unveiled podcast, formerly the Teshua Unveiled podcast. I am your host, Brad Hopp, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Pastor Sam Jones. Together, we are unveiling liberty one episode at a time. We'll be discussing the latest in trafficking news, insider stories from those being delivered, and studying the Founders Bible to learn how to return America to sanity and true freedom. Our sponsor for today's show is Teshua Tea Company. Visit TeshuaTea.com or DeliveranceTea.com. Hi, and welcome to the Liberty Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Brad Hopp, and as you can tell, Pastor Sam wasn't able to be here this week, so I'm going to continue on where we left off last week. Last week we were discussing about John Quincy Adams. This week, as we go through the Founders Bible, we're getting into Deuteronomy 5, where we start getting into talking about looking at the Ten Commandments. And you know, for those of you that are just joining us, my business partner Andrew is a missionary in communist Asia, and he and the team rescue underage girls out of sex trafficking. And here on the Liberty Unveiled podcast, we look at how is that source of freedom that the girls are experiencing now, how is that source of freedom the same source of freedom that's going to restore America and can restore America, and how is it actually the only source of freedom that's going to be able to restore America? And so we're going to dive right into that today, because really this next section really is the basis of America's restoration. If we don't come back to this stuff, we're not going to be restored. You know, we can try to do it our own way, as many different ways under the sun as we want, but God's word and God's truths are eternal. They are powerful. They are alive. And if we would just do it His way, we would be blessed. And our neighbors would be blessed. And our neighbors would want to be around us. And we wouldn't have this constant infighting and bickering. And as we go through this today, I really want you to lay aside this idea. I just want you for 1 hour to lay aside this idea that the law is bad and that doing it our own way is good. Lay that aside, and I want you to look at the law and begin to apply it and begin to see what would be the ramifications of me applying this to my life. And I want you to internalize that. If you apply this to your life, if I apply it to my life, if your neighbor applied it to their life, how would America change? How would we be restored? What would it look like? And so as we go through this, I really want you to just ponder that. And so let's jump right in here. The Ten Commandments, the basis for a free and civilized society. It is difficult to argue that any single work has had a greater or more far-reaching impact through 4 centuries of American life, law, and culture than the Ten Commandments. As such, the fact that their public display would be a matter of current debate or prohibition is almost unthinkable, and yet it is. As noted in the commentary on Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments are the embodiment of the moral law, one of the 4 types of law in the Bible, and formed the foundation of general morals in America as encompassed in the common law. The repetition here in Deuteronomy 5 provides an opportunity to demonstrate that they were also the impetus for many specific American statutory laws. The original delivery of the commandments in Exodus was to the children of Israel immediately after God had delivered them from Egypt and established them as an independent nation. Now they are being repeated to the younger generation some 40 years later, as they are preparing to finally enter the promised land. After suffering the delay and the pain of watching their parents perish in the wilderness because of their continual disobedience and refusal to enter. Numbers 14:29. Moses is renewing the covenant with them. The Ten Commandments are not mere dictates of obligation. They are life-giving promises that, if adhered to, would bring blessing and prosperity. God promised that it would go well with them, and they would prolong their days in the land they were about to possess. Such promise was not lost upon our founding fathers, who openly endorsed the application of the Ten Commandments to civil law in America. Founding Father John Quincy Adams declared, "The law given from Sinai was a civil and municipal as well as a moral and religious code. It contained many statutes of universal application, laws essential to the existence of men in society, and most of which have been enacted by every nation which ever professed any code of laws." Founding Father Noah Webster agreed, "Where will you find any code of laws among civilized men in which the commands and prohibitions are not founded on Christian principles? I need not specify the prohibition of murder, robbery, theft, and trespass. These laws are essential to the existence of men in society, and yet some critics today would object to displaying the commandments on such spurious grounds that there are too many versions, that the Lutherans have a version, as do the Jews, the Catholic, and the Orthodox faith, and that the Protestants have several different versions. They thus argue that there are so many different versions, public displays of any of them will always invoke a deep theological dispute, and therefore should be avoided. But this claim is ridiculous. What distinguishes the various versions are primarily the different ways in which they are numbered. In the original Hebrew text, the Ten Commandments appear in paragraph form with no numbers or verses. But, as they were translated into subsequent texts, various faiths and branches of Christianity chose to number them differently. For example, the first command in the Jewish version is usually the prologue in most Protestant versions, but both contain the same content. The different numberings are merely superficial man-made contrivances for ease of identification, but all versions contain the same subject matter. Yet no matter how the commandments are numbered, each finds direct application in American laws. A few such examples, chosen from dozens of similar ones, are presented below. Have no other gods. This command was directly incorporated into the first written code of laws enacted in America, those of the Virginia colony in 1610. The subsequent Massachusetts legal code of 1641 and that of Connecticut in 1642 similarly declared, "If any man, after legal conviction, shall have or worship any other god but the Lord God, he shall be put to death." Deuteronomy 13:6 and verse 10, Deuteronomy 17:2 and verse 6, and Exodus 22:20. Number 2, have no idols. Typical of the civil laws on this command was a 1680 New Hampshire law declaring idolatry. "It is enacted by ye assembly and ye authority thereof. Yet if any person having had the knowledge of the true God openly and manifestly have or worship any other god but the Lord God, he shall be put to death." Exodus 22 verse 20 and Deuteronomy 13:6 and verse 10. Note, reading such early statutes and the ones that follow can give an impression that the death penalty was freely applied to almost any crime in America. But such was not the case. This fact becomes apparent when comparing American laws with their European counterparts from the same period, as affirmed by early American historian Daniel Dorchester. When the Mayflower left England in 1620, 31 offenses were punishable with death in the mother country. By the middle of that century, the blacklist had enlarged to 223, of which 176 were without the benefit of the clergy. There were no exceptions. How far in advance the New England colonies were is evident from the fact that not a single colony code recognized more than 15 capital crimes. That might still strike as severe, but when understood in context, realize that having a copy of the scriptures for themselves in their own language to study and learn what God was like, as revealed in His Word, was a relatively new development. Prior to this, the Bible was actually kept from the people so as to keep them ignorant and easily controlled by those in power who regularly committed horrible atrocities in God's name. Given that, it is quite remarkable just how quickly these early forefathers began to learn from themselves that God was not like those who had misrepresented Him for their own aims. Number 3, honor God's name. Civil laws based on this commandment were divided into 2 categories. Number 1, laws prohibiting swearing and profanity, and number 2, laws prohibiting blasphemy. Noah Webster affirmed that both were derived from this commandment. When, in obedience to the 3rd commandment of the Decalogue, you would avoid profane swearing, you are to remember that this alone is not a full compliance with the prohibition, which comprehends all irreverent words or actions, and whatever tends to cast contempt on the Supreme Being or on His word and ordinances, i.e., blasphemy. Numerous statutory laws were enacted as a result of the 3rd command. Number 4, honor the Sabbath. From the beginning, every American colony enacted civil laws to honor the Sabbath. That legal recognition continued over subsequent centuries. For example, during the American Revolution, Commander-in-Chief George Washington issued numerous military orders directing that the Sabbath be observed. The Commander-in-Chief directs that the divine service be performed every week or every Sunday at 11 o'clock. It is expected that officers of all ranks will, by their attendance, set an example to their men. Following the Revolution, the states continued to honor the Sabbath. For example, Vermont enacted a 10-part Sabbath law in 1787. Massachusetts enacted an 11-part law in 1791. Virginia enacted an extensive 8-part law written by Thomas Jefferson in 1792. New Jersey enacted a 21-part law in 1798. And New Hampshire enacted a 14-part law in 1799. Maine enacted a 13-part law in 1821, and other states did the same. When the U.S. Constitution was written in 1787, it too honored the traditional Christian Sabbath. Article 1, Section 7, Paragraph 2 stipulates that the President has 10 days to sign a law, Sundays excepted. This Sundays excepted clause had previously appeared in the state constitutions, and so the historical understanding of this clause at both the state and federal levels was summarized by numerous courts, including the 1912 Supreme Court of Missouri. It is provided that if the governor does not return a bill within 10 days, Sundays excepted, can any impartial mind deny that it contains a recognition of the Lord's Day as a day exempted by law from all worldly pursuits? The framers of the Constitution then recognized Sunday as a day to be observed, acting themselves under a law which exacted a compulsive observance of it. Sunday was recognized as a day of rest. Other courts were equally candid about Sabbath laws and their relation to the Ten Commandments. For example, in 1950, the Supreme Court of Mississippi affirmed the Sunday laws have a divine origin. After the 6 days of creation, the Creator Himself rested on the seventh. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. Thus, the Sabbath was instituted as a day of rest. The original example was later confirmed as a commandment when the law was handed down from Mount Sinai. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus 20, verse 8. In 1967, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania similarly declared, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Deuteronomy 5:12 through 14. This divine pronouncement became part of the common law inherited by the 13 American colonies and by the sovereign states of the American Union. The modern United States Supreme Court affirms that even to this day, states have the right to enact laws honoring the Sabbath. Number 5, honor your parents. A 1642 Connecticut law specifically cited the Decalogue as the basis for its civil laws related to honoring parents. If any child or children above 16 years old and of sufficient understanding shall curse or smite their normal mother or father, he or they shall be put to death unless it can be sufficiently testified that the parents have been very unchristianly negligent in the education of such children, or so provoke them by extreme and cruel correction that they have been forced thereunto to preserve themselves from death or maiming. Exodus 21:17, Leviticus 20, and Exodus 20 verse 12. 3 centuries later, a 1934 Louisiana appeals court affirmed the continuing influence of the fifth commandment on civil laws. Honor thy father and mother is as much a command of the municipal law as it is a part of the Decalogue, regarded as holy by every Christian people. A child, says the code, whatever be his age, owes honor and respect to his father and mother. Number 6, do not murder. A 1641 Massachusetts law declared, Exodus 21:12, Numbers 35:13, 14, 30, and 31. If any person commit any willful murder, which is manslaughter committed upon premeditated malice, hatred, or cruelty, not in a man's necessary and just defense, nor by mere casualty against his will, he shall be put to death. Exodus 21:14. If any man shall slay another through guile, either by poisoning or other such devilish practice, he shall be put to death. Similar provisions derived from the prohibition in the Ten Commandments can be found in the laws of the early colonies and subsequently of the independent states, laws spanning the centuries. Consequently, courts have been very candid in acknowledging the Decalogue as the origin of American civil murder laws, such as when a 1932 Connecticut appeals court affirmed, following the promulgation of Moses at Mount Sinai, has required of each and every one of its citizens that thou shalt not murder, Exodus 20 verse 13. If that law is violated, the one guilty of it has no right to demand more than a fair trial. And if, as a result thereof, the severest punishment for the crime is visited upon him, he has no one to blame but himself. Number 7, do not commit adultery. Directly citing the Decalogue, a 1641 Massachusetts law declared, if any person commits adultery with a married or espoused wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Exodus 20 verse 14. For 3 centuries, colonies and states based their adultery policies on the Decalogue. For example, a 1787 Vermont law stated, whereas the violation of the marriage covenant is contrary to the command of God, Exodus 20 verse 14, and destructive to the peace of families. Be it therefore enacted by the General Assembly of the state of Vermont that if any man be found in bed with another man's wife, or woman with another's husband. In 1898, the highest criminal court in Texas declared, thou shalt not commit adultery, is our law as well as the law of the Bible. And in 1955, the Washington Supreme Court likewise affirmed adultery, whether promiscuous or not, violates one of the 10 Commandments and the statutes of this state. Number 8, do not steal. Early colonial laws are easily cited for evidence of the Decalogue's influence on this prohibition, but Consider more recent declarations, such as from the 1951 Louisiana Supreme Court, which acknowledged, in the Ten Commandments, the basic law of all Christian countries is found the admonition, thou shalt not steal. In 1940, the Supreme Court of California had similarly declared, thou shalt not steal applies with equal force and propriety to the individualists of a complex civilization as to the simple herdsmen of ancient Israel. And in 1914, a federal court acknowledged that the Constitution's takings clause prohibiting government seizure of private property was an embodiment of the Decalogue's 8th commandment against theft, including government theft. Number 9, do not perjure yourself. A 1642 Connecticut law declared, if any man rise up by false witness, wittingly and of purpose, to take away any man's life, he shall be put to death. Deuteronomy 19, verses 16, 18, and 19. For over 3 centuries, civil laws against perjury were openly acknowledged to be derived from the Decalogue, as when the 1924 Oregon Supreme Court declared, no official is above the law. Thou shalt not bear false witness is a command of the Decalogue, and that forbidden act is denounced by statute as a felony. Number 10. How many of our politicians today would be guilty of that one right there? Number 10, do not covet. And I'm talking to both parties. I'm not letting anybody off the hook. Number 10, do not covet. The 10th commandment actually forms the basis for many of the prohibitions given in the other commandments. That is, a violation of this commandment frequently precedes a violation of the others, particularly the command against stealing. As William Penn, the framer of the original laws of Pennsylvania, acknowledged, he that covets can no more be a moral man than he that steals, since he does so in his mind, nor can he be one that robs his neighbor of his credit, or that craftily undermines him of his trade or craft. Founding Father John Adams also acknowledged the importance of this commandment, declaring, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. If thou shalt not covet, and thou shalt not steal were not commandments of heaven, they must be made inviolable precepts in every society before it can be civilized or made free. Many courts have acknowledged the numerous other categories of laws to which this provision of the Decalogue directly applies. For example, in 1895, the California Supreme Court cited this prohibition as the basis of civil laws against defamation. In 1904, the Court of Appeals in West Virginia cited it as the basis of laws preventing election fraud. In 1951, the Oregon Supreme Court cited this part of the Decalogue as the basis of civil laws against modern forms of cattle rustling. And in 1958, a Florida appeals court cited it as the basis of laws targeting white-collar crime. There are numerous other examples affirming that this commandment of the Decalogue had a substantial influence on many other civil laws. There are hundreds of more examples irrefutably demonstrating the substantial influence of the Ten Commandments on American civil law. In fact, so clear and compelling is the historical evidence that it has been consistently acknowledged by courts across America, such as when the 1917 Supreme Court of North Carolina affirmed, our laws are founded upon the Decalogue. Not that every case can be directly decided according to what is therein or there enjoined, but we can never safely depart from this short but great declaration of moral principles, without founding the law upon the sand instead of upon the eternal rock of justice and equality. In 1950, the Florida Supreme Court similarly pointed out, a people unschooled about the sovereignty of God, the Ten Commandments, and the ethics of Jesus could never have evolved the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. There is not one solitary fundamental principle of our democratic policy that did not stem directly from the basic moral precepts as embodied in the Decalogue and the ethics of Jesus. In short, the Ten Commandments not only formed the basis of the moral law in America, but were also a direct influence on its civil statutory laws. The effect of the commandments produced a truly civilized society. For as a matter of civil policy, it matters not one whit if my neighbor is an atheist or opponent of Christianity, but if he will nevertheless govern his behavior by the basic values found in the Ten Commandments, that is, if he will refrain from killing me, stealing my property, or taking my wife, he will make a good citizen, regardless of whether or not he holds any specific religious beliefs. As John Adams affirmed, even if the Ten Commandments were not commandments of heaven, they must be made inviolable precepts in every society before it can be civilized or made free. I think that is just absolutely powerful. And it goes back to what I said earlier. If we will just obey the Ten Commandments, whether we are a believer or not, it doesn't matter. If you're not a believer and you don't believe in the precepts of Jesus Christ, if you will obey those 10 commandments, you will make a good neighbor. And a society will flourish and be prospered and be a city set upon a hill if they would just do that. But when we violate those 10 commandments, we automatically move ourselves down and down and down and down into the abyss. And there is no hope for us until we repent and turn around and follow those 10 commandments. So now we've come to the book of Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy, the author was Moses. Deuteronomy, it was written around 1400 BC. Deuteronomy means second law, and I have to apologize before I go any further. My little heater kicked on, so I apologize for that. Deuteronomy means second law because in this book there is a renewing of the covenant and a repetition of the law. This is the moment just before the new generation is about to enter the promised land. Moses is recounting their history, the great and mighty acts of God on behalf of the nation, seeking to inspire hope, engender trust, and renew their courage. Moses knows he is not going into the land with them on account of his own disobedience and failing to treat God as holy. In the face of their fear and sense of lack, God wants the new generation to know his power and willingness to provide. But Moses misrepresented him as being angry and struck the rock a second time when all he needed to do was speak. The law could show you the way, but on its own it cannot lead you in. This is about obeying his voice. Joshua will be the one to lead the people in. As such, Moses gives a complete and sobering account of all the commands and renews with them the covenant of God established with their fathers and sets before them a choice. If they will obey his voice and walk in his ways, they will know blessing and live long in the land. If they forsake the relationship, it will only invite calamity, life and death, blessing and cursing. Choose life. I can't think of a more powerful statement than that in this day and age. We are watching America go through that very thing, except we have chosen death. We have chosen cursing. It's our own fault. The key verses. Now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Deuteronomy 10:12. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life, in order that you may live, you and your descendants, by loving the Lord your God, by obeying his voice, and by holding fast to him. For this is your life and the length of your days, that you may live in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. Deuteronomy 30, verses 19 through 20. And I would say that you may live in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to George Washington, to Benjamin Franklin, to John Adams, to Thomas Jefferson, to all the founding fathers, to the Mayflower, to the Pilgrims. He swore to give this land to us. And if we'll turn back, then we can stay the plague. The key people in the book of Deuteronomy are Moses and Joshua. This is so timely. The source of American exceptionalism. Alexis de Tocqueville, a famous French statesman and historian, witnessed the amazing growth of a young America and wanted to see for himself what made the new nation so special. In 1831, he traversed America for 8 months, returning home to report what he had learned in a work now known as Democracy in America. Thoroughly impressed by what he saw, he extolled, the position of the Americans is quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one. That statement resulted in the phrase American exceptionalism, describing the unprecedented stability, prosperity, and liberty produced by the institutions and policies based on concepts such as God-given inalienable rights, individualism, limited government, full republicanism, separation of powers, and an educated and virtuous citizenry. But where did our founding fathers find these unique ideas? In an attempt to answer this question, political scientists embarked on an ambitious project to analyze some 15,000 writings from the founding era, 1760 to 1805, with the goal of isolating and identifying the political sources referenced in each work. If the sources of the references could be determined, the origin of the founders' political ideas could be determined. The researchers identified 3,154 quotations and documented the source of each, finding that the single most cited authority was the Bible. 34% of the documented quotes were taken from the scriptures, a percentage almost 4 times higher than the second most cited source. What parts of the Bible were most frequently invoked? According to the researchers, although the citations came from virtually every part of the Bible, St. Paul was the favorite in the New Testament, St. Peter was next, and then John's Gospel. Deuteronomy was the most cited Old Testament book, followed by Isaiah, Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. Other prominently cited books of the Bible were Psalms, Proverbs, Jeremiah, Chronicles, and Judges. Notice that the Old Testament book cited most often was Deuteronomy. So as you read this book, keep your eyes open for passages that could have had direct application to the formation of our constitutional republic. It is difficult to argue that any single work has had a greater or more far-reaching impact through 4 centuries of American life, law, and culture than the Ten Commandments. Did you know that each commandment finds direct application in America's laws? Are you aware that the Constitution even honors the traditional Christian Sabbath? So how is it possible that the public display of the Ten Commandments would become a matter of current debate or prohibition? The answer to that question is laid out right here. And it really comes down to what we failed to do. Deuteronomy 6, starting early in the Word. For centuries in America, the Bible was the primary textbook utilized by students. Students who became America's greatest scientists, teachers, statesmen, ministers, businessmen, and military leaders. Occasionally, someone would suggest that something other than the Bible would be a more appropriate core textbook. But such suggestions were routinely rejected by the Founding Fathers. Fisher Ames, who helped frame the Bill of Rights in the first federal Congress, addressed this issue in an article he published entitled School Books. He began by commenting on a recent trend he had observed in American education. It has been the custom of late years to put a number of little books into the hands of children containing fables and moral lessons. But, Ames noted, that each time a new school book was placed into the classroom, time was spent on it, thus reducing the time spent by students on the Bible. The overall effect was that the Bible was gradually drifting to the back of the classroom, and to this Ames strongly objected. Why then, if these books for children must be retained, as they will be, should not the Bible regain the place it once held as a school book? Its morals are pure, its examples captivating and noble, the reverence for the sacred book that is thus early impressed lasts long, and probably, if not impressed in infancy, never takes firm hold on the mind. Of course, Fisher Ames was living proof of the benefits of a Bible-based education. He learned to read the Bible early, and when only 6 years old, he had already begun the study of Latin. When 12, he had passed the entrance exam to Harvard, graduating when he was 16 and then becoming a teacher. Ames, like so many others before him and after him, had blossomed under his Bible-centered education. Wow. Interestingly, the pages of American history are filled with similar accounts of American heroes who got an early start in the Bible. For example, when signer of the Declaration, John Witherspoon, was 4 years old, he had already finished reading the Bible cover to cover. And while still a child, he could recite nearly all the New Testament by memory. Founding Father John Trumbull, a justice on the Supreme Court of Connecticut, also had finished reading the Bible through by the time he was 4. When famous author Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of the abolitionist classic Uncle Tom's Cabin, was 7 years old, she had already memorized 27 hymns and several chapters from the Bible. And when the great Daniel Webster, the defender of the Constitution, was just a young lad, his school teacher James Tappan reported, "I held up a handsome new jackknife to the scholars and said the boy who would commit to memory the greatest number of verses in the Bible by Monday morning should have it. Many of the boys did well, but when it came to Daniel's turn to recite, I found that he had committed so much to memory that after hearing him repeat some 60 or 70 verses, I was obliged to give up. He telling me that there were several chapters yet that he had learned. Daniel got that jackknife." The Bible was the primary text for all of these accomplished students. Signer of the Declaration, Benjamin Rush, was another founder who strongly objected to not using the Bible as the principal textbook in schools. and in 1791 he published a work offering numerous reasons why it must remain America's premier school text, including in the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy, we find the following words, which are directly to my purpose. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Verses 5 through 7. The learning of the Jews for many years consisted in nothing but a knowledge of the Scripture. But the benefits of an early and general acquaintance with the Bible were not confined only to the Jewish nations. They have appeared in many countries in Europe since the Reformation. The industry and habits of order which distinguished many of the German nations are derived from their early instruction in the principles of Christianity by means of the Bible. The moral and enlightened character of the inhabitants of Scotland and of the New England states appears to be derived from the same cause. The Bible should be read in our schools in preference to all other books. History demonstrates that children are capable of learning much more and at a much earlier age than we in this generation have been led to think. And if God told us in Deuteronomy 6 to educate our children in His Word at an early age, it is because He knew that they would flourish under this early intake of His Word. Let's obey this scriptural mandate and begin children and students very early in reading and learning His Word. We're going to end there for today because the next section is fairly long. But for those of you that are just joining us, and this is your first episode listening to the Liberty Unveiled podcast, my business partner Andrew is a missionary in communist Asia, and he and the team rescue underage girls out of sex trafficking over there. And we get the girls into our rescue and rehab facility, Teshua House, and we teach the girls to read and write. We teach them the gospel. We give them all new clothing, all new toiletries, medical care, crisis pregnancy counseling if they need it. We teach them work crafts and skills like making bracelets, making harvesting and processing tea and coffee, how to run a tea shop, how to run a CNC machine. We teach them all these different crafts and skills. And then what we do through Teshua Tea Company is we purchase those products from the girls, giving them economic empowerment so that when they leave our facility, they've already got a nest egg saved up because we buy those products up front from them. So all the tea and all the coffee and all the bracelets and all the accessories that I have on hand, we've already purchased from them. So they've already been paid. So then we bring those products stateside and we sell them over here, and then half our profits and 100% of our donations go back to the rescue facility. So Teshua Tea Company is always an ongoing sponsor of the Liberty Unveiled podcast. So I hope you'll stop by and check out the the TeshuaTea.com website. Again, it's TeshuaTea.com, or you can go to DeliveranceTea.com if I can talk. They both go to the same website, Teshua Tea Company, TeshuaTea.com. But like I said, for those of you that didn't catch Teshua or whatever, you can just go to DeliveranceTea.com. So thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. It always means a lot to us that you guys are tuning in. It means a lot that you're sharing the podcast with your friends and neighbors. Go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button and join us every week as we post new information or new podcasts. And again, thank you very much for joining us today, and I really appreciate it. Have a blessed week. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Liberty Unveiled podcast, setting captives free one episode at a time. The Liberty Unveiled podcast is a part of the Unresolved Podcast Network and has been brought to you by Teshua Tea Company, TeshuaTea.com or DeliveranceTea.com.